So, do you think we should have a professional intro?
Yeah, this is supposed to be our professional intro.
So this is a word which is it kind of arrived in my world and never thought that I ever utter it from my lips. You ready?
Go for it.
Compassion,
Compassion.
compassion.
Oh yeah, cool. Yeah.
Sorry,
Go.
that was my Brummie accent. Compassion.
Compassion. That was my terrible Brummie accent. I don't even know what I just said there, but cool. I love compassion. Great word. Basically forms the majority of the practice I do. So yeah, my cup of tea there.
The reason I threw it in is because a few years ago it wasn't even a word which entered my vocabulary.
Mm.
I didn't get it. It was. I remember when I trained as a nurse and probably as well during sort of psychology as a podiatrist, it was all about, empathy and sympathy and those kind of things. Compassion never came up. But then compassion started to come up when I looked more at the Buddhist material.
Mm.
But even then, didn't really get what it was. And it took me a number of years to really work out what compassion for me was anyway. And I'm sure it's not a dictionary definition. For me, compassion is very simply the idea that we appreciate that other people have had things going on in their lives which we don't know about and we don't see, which will inform them and which will make them behave in certain ways. But at that point, we kind of land with them. We're seeing an expression of that behavior in the moment. So it's being kind to the fact that they've got things going on in the past which we don't know about. But also, if they're doing something which it needs to be called out, we turn around and say, "Yeah, but you're being a dick with that." So it's that understanding of past stuff.
Mm.
Partly, some of which is not going to be their fault, but it's also holding them accountable for what they're doing in the moment.
Mm.
And I remember chatting with a monk about this ages ago, because obviously I have conversations with monks all the time because look at me, and it really was this idea about how if you take compassion into the world, it just makes such a difference. And you take these people who, on the surface, you think you're really not a nice person, but then if you lived their life as they had, if you'd have been born as them, you'd been grown up as them, you'd had the experience of being parented and then parenting and jobs and all of that kind of stuff, how would you be behaving in this moment?
Yeah.
Be doing exactly the same as them because you wouldn't know any different. And it's very easy to judge others from this beautiful standpoint over here of self-righteousness and going, yes, but I can see things you can't. But actually, if you were them, you'd be behaving exactly the same way. And
Yeah.
suddenly, which reminds me of something Brené Brown has talked about when she chatted to her husband, and she shared this on a podcast somewhere. She said that her husband turned around and said, well, she said to her husband something along the lines of, um, God, I think sometimes people aren't doing the best they can. And he went, well, actually, I like to believe that people are doing the best they can in every moment. And she said, why is that? He said, well, it just makes me feel better. And I
Yeah.
think that for me is the big thing with compassion is when I can go to a place of compassion, it just makes me feel better. And if that's an n equals one situation, I'm happy with that. I'll take those research results.
And you know what it is? It's I think it's really important to realise that everyone is doing the best they can. And I know people will. One thing I do hate about sometimes in the well-being, coaching, mental health space is, and I talk about personal responsibility a lot, but I think it's the overemphasis that people can just they should just do better. They should just do more. They just need to, you know, dust themselves off and get on with it. And that usually comes from people who only see the world through their own lens or their own system of recovery that they're created. This is why I'm really mindful of people, again, just who preach that whose only clinical experience is their own recovery journey and what worked for them, and then dismissing anything that didn't work for them or because it didn't work for them. And it's like, it's again looking for that lens of what their life is like. I think compassion is it's literally so important. I think when you said, when you're sitting there with someone and thinking, okay, what have this person been through, and really taking some time to understand it and put yourself in them shoes, and then wondering, how could I help that person? That's incredible. And sometimes, as I said, those people who are only doing the best they can, like you just said, they are doing their best. They're only doing their best because they don't know anything different. And actually, rather than beat them with a stick to say they should be, why don't we help them? That's what compassion is about. Help them and offer solutions, or just a lending ear, listening ear for these people, and say, have you thought about trying this? And I tell you what, like, it can be easy for someone like me to sit or yourself. We know a lot. We don't know everything. Got loads of areas, loads of blind spots to, address. But I have a good knowledge of how the mind works, how the body works in terms of mental health and stress and all that stuff, and I've got loads of experience working with different people. But a lot of these people don't know this stuff. So you can literally say like the cheesiest of motivational lines, and they go, oh my God, I've never thought of it. Like this whole idea, I spoke to someone the other day, and they never even comprehended the idea that when it comes, they're giving themselves a hard time with the thoughts they're having and the feelings they're having, that maybe to detach, use the observing mind and ask themselves, what would you say to a best friend speaking? And they go, oh, I've never thought of that. I've never thought of that. So those people who are berating, who're saying they should do more, usually aren't at the level, like I'm saying, not level like level better, but don't have the awareness that some other people do. And it's not fair to berate these people. That's not compassion. That's just being a dick. Essentially, like, you should do it because I did it. You're like,
Yeah,
well, no.
exactly. And I think compassion, using compassion if you've never accessed it before, is bloody hard. Because there's all these judgmental thoughts come up. And do I judge people? Absolutely, all the time, because I'm human. But what I do is I kind of go, oh, I'm judging someone, right? How does that make? And I think selfishly, how does that make me feel? But also, if you can spend a moment just being nice to someone and being compassionate to someone, the physical footprint of it is tiny. It's as far as, from your core to speaking to them, but the psychological footprint and ripple effect is huge.
Yeah.
And that for me is a huge thing. But there's so much in there. When you're talking about, you touched on it about, but you're berating people for not having success. We know the way society is at the moment is it's not set up for compassion. It's very much set up for, if you're successful, then society was part of that because they gave you the environment. Society gave you the environment to go and do that. But if you fuck it up, then it's like, well, you weren't working hard enough, you weren't good enough. It's all your fault. We know this is a neoliberalist kind of idea as much as anything else. I'm probably getting that wrong by throwing in big words, which I probably don't know what they mean. But the stuff which happened from sort of the late 70s, early 80s on, the greed is good. The everyone is out for every man for themselves, now every person for themselves. And it's very hard for people to be compassionate to others when they are too busy trying to protect themselves and trying to look out for, be successful and have enough money to do all the things they do. It's much easier in some respects to be compassionate when you haven't got to worry about putting food on the table, or electricity in the light bulbs and warm water in your radiators. But also at the same, by the same token, and you've touched on this as well, is actually flipping that compassion around and going for self-compassion. That for me has always been the hardest. Is, I could be nice to other people. Can I be nice to myself? Yeah, but it grates a little bit. And I know with the humorous stuff that I do, I'll self-deprecate. How much of that is humor and how much of that is actual truth wrapped up in humor for entertainment value? So there's the compassion outward and there's the compassion inward.
And this is it. And I think that the compassion, I find humans are generally find it easy to give compassion to others than they do to themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's because we have this often, and it's a big problem. I see it in a lot of the work I do, is these people will live with this mentality of they should have done this, they should be like this, they should be able to do this. And you're like, why can't I handle this? And I'm sitting there thinking your whole life around you is falling apart, or has been for a while now. And you're thinking you should be able to do more. Like, who compared to who's got their life figured out? Who would have managed to do that? Like you said earlier, who you are literally anyone else in that situation going through everything you've been through would have done exactly the same as you.
Exactly.
People, we can't see this. We're like literally, in a way, our worst own enemies. And that's not because we're born to be our own worst enemies. That's usually conditioning us because of society. We look at people who are successful. We look at other people growing up in school who seem to have it figured out, who have this and that. And we internalize that rather than recognizing that we're all individuals growing up in different environments and with different circumstances, we think, oh, I must be the problem. So it's really hard to be compassionate because you sit there and go, oh, why can't I just do this? And then you've got knobheads who are then saying that as well, and it just who don't really have a clue. And it's like, you know, I kind of don't really have a lot of time for people who kind of, I think tough love's important. And again, that's a part you mentioned earlier about that's important. You know, you've got to call people out. You don't just sit there and validate their experiences when you can see literally every choice they're making is causing their life to fall to shit.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's important that you don't go, wow, you just need to sort yourself out, because that's not going to help either. It's kind of like, okay, you know, and that's like I'm sure you do in your coaching, and I do with people. It's like, okay, what can you know, for instance, what's one thing you can start to do that can start to make something a bit better, and start there, and then holding them accountable to that. So that could be like doing something really small and insignificant. But actually, like, you know, with the compassion and recovery, it's the accumulation of that. It's the snowball effect of doing that daily. It kind of builds up over time. But it starts with a lot of it has to by learning to be compassionate with ourselves and not give us such a hard time. And ideally, if anyone's going through a tricky time, you want to work with someone who has that mentality, who has that way of working, who's not going to sit there and go, oh, by the way, it's because you have a mental health diagnosis, or it's because this and that. It's usually, okay, well, because you've gone through a lot of shit. Maybe this is the way you see things, this is the way you think things, and you haven't had the support, but I'm here for you, and let's do this together.
Mic drop. We can't really say much more than that, can we, about compassion? But we can both say that we absolutely adore compassion, and it has been, for me, probably one of the biggest things, and it's opened so many doors for me in terms of the way I think about other people and me. It's made me feel so much happier. So always do it. All of you, everyone listening and watching this, just be compassionate.
Well, honestly, I can honestly say, as soon as I started reading into it quite a few years ago now, it changed the way I practiced. And I could honestly say, not to like blow smoke up my own ass, but like the feedback I generally get from people is, you know, it's nice to have someone who's not judging me and just listening and giving me that space. Yeah. And I know, like on LinkedIn, I can come across as a bit of a knob, but I promise I'm not like that in clinics. And, you know, and what's that book? What's the book? The Compassionate Mind. Like, if anyone wants, I'm sure most people who, well, I'm making an assumption, they probably haven't read it, but Compassionate Mind for me is one of the best books to read. And actually, when I went into that job recently in one of the GP surgeries, in the little room I'm working in, saw on the bookshelf The Compassionate Mind, and I thought, oh, I'm in a good place here if that's on the shelf. So yeah,
compassion, life is good. There we go. I think that's all we need to say on that subject, don't we?
Yeah.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
So you've been listening to Alex and Dave, and we couldn't actually think of a way to finish off each episode. So Alex is doing his version of Careless Whisper for your listening pleasure. But if you've enjoyed today's episode and you like Alex's musical interlude, then come and tell us. You can find us online somewhere. And if you like what we do, 5-star review would always be good. And share the love.